Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space. And as always, I hope that you enjoy. Story number 1, Diplomacy and Yes, written by Lords the Dupe. For 6 months in a row, the Core World Senate had been deadlocked on an issue of expansion versus colonialism. And for 6 months, the single deciding vote had fallen, day after day, to the exact same delegates. The Vry, the Klist, and the humans. 6 months of loggerhead situations had worsened every aspect of life in the Senate, tainting other commissions and committees, with no real end in sight. Until a member of the initiating process, Representative Malai Farrow, approached the human consulate on his own, no vanguard, security detail, and only his own token weapon badge of office in hand, who then waited patiently for 16 hours to hold a private meeting with the human delegation spokesperson, Cheryl Anton Willits, renowned for her finesse and periodic acts of generosity. When the meeting was scheduled, still, Malai Farrow waited, patient as a tide, and was admitted on the second day, still clad in their somewhat sullied uniform, and entered the private meeting space. There they took the offered seat and accepted the neutral beverage, remarking positively on the tea being served that day. Humans could reliably provide exceptional beverages, and their teas were often at the top of every trade delegation's requests and covert bribe lists. "You showed remarkable restraint, Representative Farrow, in this unique meeting request," Cheryl said, her tone polite, features appearing careworn, despite the usual human tendency to both remain uncaring of the ravages of age as well as eschewing unnatural cosmetic efforts. "That struck me as something to take note of, and give attention to, which I suspect was your point." Then she raised her own beverage, a cup of water with only a slice of citrus fruit native to the world hosting their community. To this Malay Farrow nodded gravely and said, "It was intentional, because I know that humans appreciate theatrics." With a small tone of mirth in his quasi-feline features, his race, the Gar Alta, were descended from the fastest, most adaptive feline-themed creatures in the same way that humans had descended from primates, save that the tail was retained for them, and the small, twitchy ears were slowly being absorbed into a streamlined presence of their skulls. To that end, I won't apologize, because this meeting, it has untold implications, all of which center on the survival of my species and culture, in roughly that order. He then set his cup of tea down and waited, demonstrating that strange patience. "We have analyzed the needs of the Go'alta and determined what you need," Cheryl said, looking flatly at Malai Farrow, her hands placid in a folded pattern in front of her, resting on the desk's surface. "This perspective of the 19 worlds you wish to, and this term is used euphemistically, please understand, annex. 13 of them are occupied by sapiens, either petitioning for membership in the Core World Senate or soon to qualify. We interpret it as either to be a preamble to genocide or as a creation of an artificial voting bloc." Then she smiled, gesturing to the tea in front of Malai Farrow. Controlling his anger, the representative avoided showing his curled teeth, and instead settled for a throatier tone, one bordering on hostility. "Clearly," he began, "a misunderstanding is at play. Those worlds are lush with resources necessary for the continued growth and subsequently the survival of my species. Without them, we would have to strip mine a dozen colonies and thus ruin their ecologies. Is it not the Earth itself which your people are most ashamed of, for much the same reason?" The smile he offered was far from friendly. The fate of the human homeworld was a moral and economic lesson, and one studied briefly by his own team of experts prior to the meeting, regarding him with stories dating back 200 cycles to when humanity first went into the stars and grasped their future. What they left behind was a bitter, poisoned place, filled with caches flooded with trash, cities emptied of potential, and skies choked with the final birds into silent death. "Again," Cheryl said, "this is a misunderstanding, although you do have a valid point, for the wrong reason. and with that she then poured a decanter of tea directly onto the floor next to her desk, never breaking eye contact with Malai Pharaoh. Her expression stony, eyes cold, tone crisp and empty as space itself. This was once worth more lives than exists within your entire genus. This was a poison to our souls. This simple beverage, now fought over in countless cafes and community halls, was the death of untold millions. When it was empty, she placed the decanter on her desk. Wordless confusion settled into Malai Pharaoh's face. He surprisingly blinked away. Yet, before he spoke, she continued to address him. Our species, we humans, once trafficked in this tea. We shipped it, at some expense, of course, after extracting territory and loyalty from countless cultures, all because it produced both money and dominion. If it could be grown, it was forced to be grown, and if it could be harvested, the locals were forced to sell it, all to one very slim number of traffickers. And if the locals rebelled, there was a reply. She then knocked the decanter to the floor, shattering it into 1,000 sharp shards of clear, perfect crystal. They would die by the thousands, over and over. We demonstrated this point, and thus we kept the idea and term in mind when we see other bullies. And then she smirked, looking directly into Malai Pharaoh's now fearful eyes. She leaned forward, hovering over the edge of her desk, glaring at him, seeing him wince and shrink back in his chair. Gunboat diplomacy. A funny phrase, that one. It means, if you don't do what we say, you'll see what we do once. She grinned madly, the infamous human expression, much a cause for concern in every strategy and tactical meeting. To see it in a time of focus on violence or of risk was to know. Death was uncomfortably close. No other sapien could say with clarity that an expression conveyed so much menace. No claw, tooth, or nor sheathed spur demonstrated such zeal for the stuff. She then settled back and gestured to Malai Pharaoh. Take this message to your people. That is the biggest, meanest bullies who ever has survived. They bred and produced a family line. Tell them that I am a finished product of what you persist in calling a death world, and that from that death world, our term gunboat diplomacy, it carries weight and is still as sharp as spear and is in our arsenal. Then she nodded to Malai Pharaoh. Tell me that if they make their move, we will not be standing idly at the sides, wringing our hands. We will drink their fecking tea, and they will harvest their fecking tea, and we'll force them to sell their fecking tea. And they have until they stop being afraid of us to understand what we might possibly mean by their fecking tea. Malai Pharaoh slowly rose, his pants now damp, teeth chittering nervously, and nodded, eyes wide in terror. Oh! He paused, his hand shaking, cup and his grip, in his mouth opened in a rictus and a fearful surrender. Before you go, Cheryl Anton Willett stood and loomed over him, her height only 16 centimeters taller, yet she might as well have been a battle station. Drink your fucking tea! All he could do was nod and obey, then finally understand what she meant. 4 hours later, the petition for expansion was removed with prejudice, and the worlds were formally annexed by the Terran Collective in the region, with a remarkable vote of support from the Gar Alta, who simply and politely requested a commission tax on any tea futures which may come from those respective homeworlds. Ratified and granted, the ledger said. End of story. Story number 2. It's round, right? Written by Shock Lionheart. Look, human, your star, Sol, Mercury, Venus, your moon, Mars, Ceres, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, all of them are spherical. Yes, that's right. Oh, so logically, it makes the most sense for Earth to be flat. The alien interrogators slammed their 6-fingered hands on the desk. 2 hours, and not one iota of progress. Worse, it was abundantly clear the human wasn't trolling. The human honesty truly believed what they were saying. That arguably made it so much worse. Okay, let's try this. If the Earth were flat, Sol would illuminate the entire side evenly. That's clearly not what's happening. Your planet has a day side and a night side. The night side is such because the planet is now between the night side and the star.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
And the rotation is smooth because Earth is round.
Nope, Earth's flatter than a pancake.
Fine! How do you explain time zones then? How do you explain seeing a sunset, calling someone in another time zone, and disagreeing on the sun's relative position to your respective bodies?
That's all just an optical illusion.
Are you kidding me? An optical illusion? How?
You know, you're trying way too hard to convince me of this Earth's round nonsense. You must be working for them. I'm not gonna go along with it. I know your tricks.
The interrogator's frustrated scream turned the heads 4 decks away. End of story. The algorithm reckons you should be watching this video next, and I recommend that you should be always watching my video. So, click with energy! And yes, clicking that does help the channel. Thank you very much. I just want to give a quick thanks to the Tier 5 patrons and channel members. Alithia, Barky, Fudic Yol, Cam Maxwell, Caspar Onholtz, White Band 420, Lord Asrakal, Arcalian, and Oakfield.